Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Millennial Think Tank. And tonight we are tackling what may be one of our more controversial subjects among think tankers, which is the responsibility social networks have to privacy, to their users, to their brand, and all of those issues. So I'm going to start with having everybody introduce themselves quickly, who they are, where they fit into the millennial spectrum, and what they do. And Albert, I'm going to start with you.
Hi everyone, I'm Albert Chen. I currently live in Silicon Valley. I work here at Hewlett-Packard in product marketing for the Enterprise Services Group, and I also do social media and consulting for small businesses and startups in the San Francisco Bay Area.
Great. Essie?
Oh, hi, I'm Essie Jones. I work with Amy at our company.
Joe?
My name is Joe Cardillo. I'm 30, and I run a journalism startup, and I also do content and growth for startups.
The great Petrolino.
I am Laura Petrolino, otherwise known as the Great Petrolino, and I'm Client Services Director at Armit Dietrich.
Samantha.
My name is Samantha. I'm 23, so I'm a younger millennial, and I work in public interest research.
Great. And Tiffany.
Tiffany Daniels. I'm 30, an older millennial, and I work in communications and business relations for Workforce Development Corporation. So we help people get jobs.
Great. Okay, so we're going to dive right in. And the very first question, which is straightforward, is how much responsibility do social networks have to the privacy of their users? And when this came up the first time, there was a big discussion because DJ Thistle was on, kept saying that they're free. So when you use a free tool, you give up privacy. And lots of people didn't agree. Some people did. So who wants to jump on it first? Really? I'm going to start calling.
I'll go.
Every week, the first question is that way. From now on, I'm just naming somebody. Go.
I have to agree that when you're using a free network, and free as in you are not literally paying for it, that you do give up a certain amount of privacy. Now, I feel that just as kind of like a social contract, the social networks have a responsibility to alert us of the privacy that we are giving up, and extra benefit would be to provide us the opportunity to select a lot of what we give up and what we don't. So, for example, you have different privacy, groupings or filters that you can put on your profile in Facebook or LinkedIn or whatever. So I think that's kind of a social contract thing. I don't think it's something that they should be required to do because, again, it's not an exchange of I'm looking for this service from you and paying you for that privacy and that protection.
So So you think that the privacy, let's take Facebook for instance, you think that the privacy choices you get are sufficient?
I do, yeah. I mean, it's not something, Facebook is a voluntary thing. You volunteer to participate in Facebook. So you could very well, if it's something that bothers you that much, you could very well opt yourself out. It's not a requirement for anything.
And so you can opt yourself out of every social network.
You could. Exactly.
Yeah, so you think that's good enough? It's good enough that the way it is. Does anybody disagree with that?
I disagree with that. Sorry, I'm not a millennial, but one thing that I want to you guys to think about is that as much as you think Facebook and all those social networks are actually protecting you, the minute that something happens to you, how much will Facebook actually try to find, let's say, for example, if your account was hacked or somebody was actually, what happened?
Okay, what if they're doing this? What if this happened to a friend of mine. His profile was copied and the person was doing things that were destructive to his career. That person ended up actually GPSing his home and making all sorts of threats, and the local police, he ended up getting a sentence for it. But Facebook did nothing.
They didn't. So that's exactly it. There's a law that they have to protect its users, but sometimes it's to the detriment of its own community that it's doing that. It's actually protecting the perpetrator as opposed to the users of the platform.
Yeah, I mean, there's a great example. I don't know if any of you remember it because it only was like 2 months. or maybe even a month. It was really quick. This would have been back in probably 2010, 2011. I mean, it's a while ago. Facebook introduced this feature, as they always do, not by letting you opt in, by just simply making it happen one day, where you could see any activity of anybody that visited your page and vice versa. I don't know if any of you remember that. That got canned pretty quick for what I think are fairly obvious reasons. That actually potentially brought up stalking laws in some states, because some states do address stalking in deeper ways than others. And I don't know, Samantha, maybe you can speak for Canada. I'm not as sure how it is outside the U.S., but I think social networks have a legal and ethical responsibility to be really transparent about this stuff. And I don't know, I don't accept the idea that like just because it's free, it's completely like at that point up for grabs. I don't agree with that.
Albert, I want to hear what you think on this. All right, you froze.
Well, I mean, I think okay, cool. With the whole idea that using your social networks is completely voluntary, and if you don't want to be there, you don't necessarily have to. And I think that there are enough tools there where you can figure out how to toggle your privacy in the many ways that you can. And I also think that the other side is just, internet culture tends to be very mean, right? I guess we can talk about the leakage of all the photos from our celebrities that we saw over the weekend, to right down to you being I guess impersonated over a social network. And I would say that when you opt into Facebook, right, you have to sign a terms and conditions sheet, and that pretty much puts you at the whim of Facebook. And customer service is not something that a lot of companies in Silicon Valley do anyway. If you had a problem with Twitter, I would say good luck. Same way with Facebook, same way with Google, and so on. Customer service is not the focal point of what goes on in the Valley. It's technological innovation, it's getting the best thing out there, and focusing on those areas. Customer service is important, of course, but those are contract jobs, not necessarily people who do full-time perm staff type jobs in those companies. And so if you don't care about the customer on the customer service end, and privacy is kind of an extension of that, you're going to see a lot more impersonal approach to social media, kind of like what you see right now with all the controversial things that are out there.
See, okay, that makes total sense to me. I really get what Kieran brought up in the globalization hangout, which is when this subject came up and we realized it was something important. Is Kieran said, no, it's not free because they're becoming data rich. I mean, Google makes money off of data, and when you participate, even though it's voluntary, there is a trade, there is a social contract. So I don't agree that it's free. And but to me, I guess the bigger issue is not. We make agreements with Facebook. We'll pick on Facebook, but we do this with every social network. We sign a terms of agreement. There are certain things that we're giving up. We know that, right? Like Messenger. You don't need to use Messenger. So if you don't want Facebook to have access to every picture on your phone, Jennifer Lawrence, right? Then you wouldn't use Messenger. But I'm talking about when there are breaches as well that you aren't aware of, because that happens all the time. And the answer seems to be from social networks stuff.
A good example of that, that it has happened, you mentioned sort of the trolling aspect. This has happened on Facebook and Twitter. I've seen some stuff on Twitter you wouldn't believe the kinds of things that Twitter just doesn't want to deal with. And it took them forever to introduce blocking and all that. And really, probably to your point, Albert, the only reason it happened was because enough people who were on the inside using Twitter in the tech sort of circles were like, this is insane. I mean, the other day I saw this woman who runs like a great blog, is really thoughtful and smart. She showed her private messages in Twitter, and it was like, I'm going to kill you. Here's your address. I'll be there in 2 hours. I know your husband's name. I mean, some of the stuff that was there blew my mind, and that's not uncommon, unfortunately, and Facebook has the same kind of problems. So especially when you get to that question of like breaches of privacy and questions of threatening people's lives, that's really serious, and social networks 100% have a responsibility to deal with that. I totally think that's true.
And especially when there's certain laws put in place where you have to look at it. Like FIPA is a pretty big one in Canada, which is the Freedom of Information and Personal Privacy Act. So it's like if you literally are doing things against FIPA, you can arrest someone, but social media networks aren't being cooperative with law enforcement for that. So it's like if someone is literally threatening to kill someone, they're not following through with what FIPA says. So it's like even though we have the laws to protect, the corporations will fight against that.
I think it's important to look at social networks as the fact that, these are businesses, right? So at the end of the day, the business has, Facebook and Twitter are both public companies now. They are both beholden to their shareholders. As a startup, even in Silicon Valley, once you get funding, you also give up your company to venture capitalists who take almost half your company, voting rights, and all that stuff. At the end of the day, Facebook and Twitter need to make money. They need to make ads, all that kind of stuff. And customer service is not necessarily a revenue-driving activity. And so how do you turn that into something where you can say, increase revenues while also considering customer service? Because in a lot of ways, it's not a very scalable, activity. That's why companies move their customer service things offshore. It ends up sucking a lot, but they do it because even though they know they need it, they need to save money too. And so, you can do that with Facebook and. Yeah, go on.
I guess my only question, I'd be curious to hear what you have to say then, and perhaps other people. My only question would be, and I kind of like, Amy and I talked a little bit earlier about this, but I was sort of like, the internet is not where anything can happen and nobody has to be responsible ever.
Mm-hmm. Wait, Joe cut out, but what Joe was saying is the internet's not free, right? That's
no.
You cut out a lot.
Can you guys hear me okay? I'm sorry.
Yeah.
So, it's not this sort of free playground, and it hasn't been for a while, really. And so, to me, it's like there's this kind of illusion that these companies exist in this world. But, Facebook is a publisher. They do have responsibility, right? News breaks on Twitter. Like, these networks that we're talking about they're not businesses, and they make money off of the fact that they have social responsibility, that they have a relationship with users. So I don't know. I think asking them to have
explain to me, how do they make the money off of the fact that they have relationships with? I get that they have data.
Those are brand partnerships.
We're talking about as a news.
Yeah, brand partnerships is one of the biggest pieces. That's one of the biggest ways that they monetize and create traffic to run through. That stuff happens on the back end a lot more than people are aware of. But
I tend to think that social networks are your middlemen to a lot of what gets put out there. CBS, ABC, or 5 major networks will eventually put news out there anyway. It just goes out faster on social media because you can write a quick status update. And the quality of news deteriorates because...
But I think this is hugely important. This is what someone said in that hangout. Those networks are journalists, right? When they're doing a news show, they're going to be held accountable, just like what happened with CBS and Dan Rather and that whole blow-up, right? Mm-hmm. There is no accountability on social networks. Anybody is a journalist. Anybody, when Anonymous, we're jumping way ahead, but and I'm going to get to you, Samantha, so don't let me forget about Tumblr, but when Anonymous shut down, when Twitter shut down that Anonymous profile because they put out the name of the police officer in Ferguson, supposedly, they put the wrong name out, that shot Michael Brown, Twitter shut him down instantly, and I thought, well, how the hell did they shut that down when they haven't shut down abusive, threatening, people? Look at what happened with Robin Williams' daughter, who left Twitter because of the trolling, right? Mm-hmm. This is what I don't get. They play journalists sometimes. Who were they afraid of? Who were they afraid of when they shut down Anonymous, right? So I think it's
well, that's a super good point because there's inconsistencies. That's where the problem is, because there's not these set rules yet for them. There's inconsistencies about what's okay and what's not okay. Same thing on Facebook, and if you report a group that you think is abusive in some way, or
the million misogynistic pages that Facebook left up for ages until there was a change.org petition and people went wild. It was after the Steubenville stuff, it is. I think that's it. That's what frustrates me is the inconsistency. That some people are protected more than others, and it's random. And Samantha, talk about Tumblr, because Samantha brought Tumblr up in the chat. and Albert said the Wild West of the internet, which I like. So go talk about that.
So Tumblr exists on the concept that you create a screen name and you have your own personal email in there and things that go like that. The thing I wanted to mention about Tumblr is not like the fact that it's the Wild West, because everything is on Tumblr. Like, nothing is safe on Tumblr. We have like neo-Nazis on one side, and we got porn blogs on another, and like then you have people who just want to blog pretty photos and whatever. But the thing about Tumblr is that there's a lot of people who use it for content control. So what will happen is, like, if someone posts a review that tags someone to video in it, or whatever, that YouTube person can go to Tumblr and say that they're using their image in a way that they don't approve of and have it removed, because it goes against like their license or whatever. Even though if they put it onto a site like YouTube, they can't do that. Like, that's open. Like, you can't unshare that once you put it on YouTube. So it's kind of like this idea that the people who get their stuff removed are often people who are using someone doing problematic things on the internet, and then someone saying that they have to remove that YouTube. But then they won't remove posts or YouTube posts that are problematic in other ways, and it's like they pick and choose as well. But it's people using Creative Commons laws incorrectly, and then people using privacy laws incorrectly to try and get information. I've seen people do it that way too, where they'll be like, I've pulled your IP address because we can trace that on Tumblr and put it up here so people can use that IP address to trace people and then send like actual like attacks to other people. So like there's a lot of things with that. And I mean, like, I know a little bit about the hacktivist community because I've done some research on them, but not enough to like be, I know a lot about the hacktivist community, but like there's ways that people are using laws like this through social media sites to get what they want that aren't being criticized, but other people can do it and aren't getting criticized. So it's really a mixed bag of everything.
Well, it's totally inconsistent everywhere.
And it's worth noting, like, to Albert's point, that particularly when these sort of web platform companies or social networks are scaling, they don't really like. The truth is that this kind of stuff we're talking about, like the more rough side of it, can be very expensive and not very easy to scale. But I don't know. I don't consider that customer service. I guess I think it depends a little bit on, when someone's getting death threats that are very specific, like the one I shared in chat. I don't think that's customer service. I think that's just that's way beyond that. But I do understand from a technology perspective, having worked in San Francisco and been in that VC sort of back culture, that they don't necessarily see it as a responsibility or very scalable or efficient, and yet it's very serious not to. And I think that's where particularly enforcing the law as it applies in the offline world, because like just to point out, a lot of what we're talking about does not get applied online. If you did some of the stuff or said some of the stuff that people do offline, you would be absolutely charged with a crime.
And that's the thing too, is that online things that have to do with like hate speech, including online forums, are just coming out now, and people aren't sure how to navigate through that. So it's getting really problematic on like, oh well, is that a personal opinion and they're posting on their own blog, like if they were thinking it, or is that like hate speech because they're posting it in the online forum that everyone can see? So people are like trying to figure out how this goes through, and then because of that, these social media groups are choosing when to help law enforcement based on law, or if they think it's harassment or not, and so they're playing into the hands of the law when they shouldn't. Like, that's not their job.
So, Albert, let me ask you this though, just straightforward because of where you are and where you work. Do you see it? Do you see it changing at all? Do you think anybody that's working in social networks really gives a crap about the privacy issue, or is it sort of, this is what it is, and for all the reasons you mentioned, that's not how they make their money? Is it ever going to be different?
I feel like I stopped caring a long time ago.
I so get
it. Because it's just like, I work in this industry. I gotta do what I gotta do to make a living in it, and so I guess the way I fight it is I just say less. There's really I know people are all about, oh, you gotta say something every day, you gotta post all that stuff, and that stuff just brings like a war in my own head that I don't feel like having. I feel a lot happier actually when I don't post on Facebook for a couple days.
There you go.
Um,
There you go.
and when it comes to, I think, working in this industry, I mean, yeah, you gave up your privacy kind of a long time ago. I feel like if you want to succeed in digital marketing, you have to be online. And being online means you have your website, you have your LinkedIn, your Twitter is constantly updated, you're using, whatever app you use, whether it's Buffer or whichever, to continuously have a feed of content going through your social feeds, things like that. So you really have to, if you choose to get in this industry, there's something that you do have to give up. I mean, I'm not going to go off and talk about, my relationship status or what I had for dinner. That's doesn't really matter as much, but you give up quite a bit. And I mean, I'm not the type that takes selfies or does any of that type of stuff. I'm kind of more of an observer of how all social media works, and it's really fascinating in a kind of weird and creepy way. But it's just that people, you just have to know what you give up when you get into it, and you do give up a lot, but. I mean, you also have to build, I think, on an aside, you have to build yourself a network of people who actually care. Pick up your cell phone, call somebody, meet for coffee. You don't have to splatter everything that's happened to you, on your social networks, because I mean.
And I think
yeah.
what's come out in all these hangouts, because we've done so many, is that millennials in particular, I think, are hyper aware that some of it's their responsibility. We talked a lot about the fact that most of our tank would never click on a Facebook ad. Even if they like it, they'll go and Google it separately, right?
I will only accidentally click on Facebook ads too, so I mean,
I'm not a very private person. For me, it's been, I think it's an easier adjustment to say whatever. I mean, I put a lot of crap on Facebook, but I don't put much personal stuff, as far as relationships.
And I want to add in one more thing that I think matters a lot that probably doesn't get mentioned because of the differences. I think when you're a female on social media, the experience is a whole lot more different. Men can be very, very creepy people. Send requests, chats, things like that. And it's just like, I mean, you see like one of your female friends puts up a new profile picture, 250 likes, and you look at the comment section, you're gorgeous, you're beautiful, I want to talk to you, I sent you a message, here's a creepy photo of me, are you interested in meeting me? It's things like that. And so as a male, I don't think we're in tune with that, but I think as a female, when you have that type of experience going on your social networks, it does make you feel a lot more, I think, apprehensive to, okay, yeah, these privacy features do matter to me because I don't want some creeper from, halfway across the world sending me this message, oh, I found you through Google, I'm interested in getting to know you better, what's your Skype ID, all that junk. And I don't know what compels people to do that on the.
I've had a zillion. I mean, that to me, it's funny you said that though, because I had put a picture up a couple weeks ago, and one of my friends made the comment that he felt like he was on Tinder because of all the comments that were being made. But to me, those protections are kind of there. I get friend requests often from people I don't know, and you just block them. I think more about the privacy issues that you think are under control, right? And then you find out they aren't.
And I think Tiffany in the comments here said that it's better if you've developed a thick skin in real life. That I think what happens to you over social kind of feels a little bit better. Maybe we want to talk about that a little bit more too.
I think that's a really good point. And Albert, you mentioned that you should have a life off of social too, like bring a conversation off of social.
Yeah.
And I think that's a really important aspect of things that people often overlook, is that that often we live in a world that a lot of people, their worlds are completely surrounded in social, and that's the world that they live in. They don't necessarily have a lot of offline connections. Like, their reality is Facebook and Twitter and whatever social network they operate in, and that's a really scary place to be in. And I think that's when there's a lot of problems that start coming up, because those worlds become really real. And so so it's something you know, you can always
And I think as
tell.
millennials, right, we're caught between two places. We have people who like to look at their phones all day long. I'm
Mhm.
very, very guilty of that. And you have that feeling of the fear of missing out, where you see friends having so many great things happening in their lives, and you feel like you're losing out on stuff. And so, I mean, for me, I also look at what goes in my Facebook feed, kind of like maybe similar to what I eat every day for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. It has to be a very holy place. It has to be a temple of sorts where you really have to let the right things in and you have to keep the
Mhm.
wrong things out. And if you
Yeah.
got people who post nothing but inspirational quotes all day, I get sick of that because it's like, okay, I know you're trying to build up your brand, but I really am not interested anymore. And you really have to be comfortable with hitting the I don't like this or the hide button or the unfollow button.
I guess I wonder what you all think of this is like sort of old news at this point, but I mean, I don't know. Look, I'm a total structure geek, right? And so I think about experiences from start to finish. And, I've worked, like you, Albert, I've worked in Silicon Valley, so I know how that stuff gets built, right? I know who's actually doing it because I've met those people and I've met their bosses and their bosses' bosses, and their motivations are pretty interesting, to say the least, especially when you get down there in the South Bay. But the structure that defines how we choose to like or not like, or what we might see or not see, I think there's a real illusion of that we control it. I mean, and I think the old news I was mentioning is Facebook's sort of study of, oh, let's just show 700,000 people just negative stuff for a while and see what that does. I don't think that was a choice for those people. And I know from watching Google and Facebook and Twitter, which are kind of the main places I've existed on, that they do those tests very quietly. They just kind of, oh, we'll just try this with 6% of our user base and see what happens. And that level of
Oh yeah. I mean, I think who
hard,
was it?
right?
It was Robert Scoble who was Robert Scoble was on on with Leo Laporte, I think, last Sunday, talking about how you can literally train, your Facebook feed to show the things that you want want it to show you, by everything from liking things to hiding Facebook why you don't like something. And yeah, I mean, you have who was it? It was OkCupid that just last month said that they did this kind of test where they put people and they matched people up against each other who weren't very matchable. And yeah, this caused a lot of fury among people because it's just like, what are you doing? This is, dating on OkCupid is a serious thing. I have friends who've been married off of OkCupid. And so you definitely have to consider, I think, how you use your social networks, but also know that everything you take on there is, not nothing to be taken too seriously. Because yes,
in that, like in the context of that Facebook study, and perhaps also OkCupid, like that's totally fine. Like, kind of, you think that sort of is part of just the opt-in process, or like the fact that they're not being told that they're tested on, or whatever the case might be, or does that sort of fall into?
I think you should be told that you're being tested on. I think there's a responsibility to that, because that alters the experience that you're having on a particular platform. And I guess maybe if you're not being told that you're being tested on, that's, on the other hand, it's like, okay, that makes it more organic, right? You want to see how people react to certain things, where everybody's, test tube social media lab rats, and so maybe that helps them make it better.
So is that opted in? Do we opt into that in the terms and agreement, that we're going to be tested on psychologically without our own knowledge? I mean, I don't think we did.
No, but
when was the last time you read an end user license agreement?
Yeah, and you know what? I really don't think it gets down to the user level. To tell you honestly, I think it's aggregated across like different profiles, and so they'll draw conclusions based on what, let's say, a sample of, let's say, 100 people that are posting things. Remember, Amy, that guy, Dave, God, I forgot his name, from Crowdly, and he had talked about the fact that Facebook had hired an artificial intelligence data scientist. And his job is to really understand, what makes people tick when somebody puts up a post. What are the combinations of likes, or even the context of the things that people say that resonate with a certain post, right? And they continue to test that all the time. At the end of the day, they want to show that to marketers to say, if you do X, Y, and Z, this is what people will respond to, which is, in a way, it's a good thing, but they have enough of a sample base.
Yeah, I think you think it's a good thing, and this is, Albert, you, Joe, Laura, me, We all work in online marketing, right? I think that we are much more likely to give up privacy because we think the get back is bigger than Joe Schmo, who doesn't understand all of this, who thinks that he has what he's and I don't mean Joe Schmo isn't smart. I mean they're not in tune with all of these things, and they don't really care about data, right?
Also, like, let's be honest, being a fairly, sophisticated crowd when it comes to this, let's not even pretend. I bet everybody here is probably pretty careful about what they put online, right? I know I am.
Yep.
Oh yeah, definitely.
And I get that. I mean, I wanted to talk about the user's responsibility. Let me ask you this question, though. If, especially somebody like you, Joe, who really cares about privacy, I mean, I'm just not a private person. I have a good friend who's an extremely private person. He won't put diddly on Facebook. I mean, he kind of lurks, more than anything. If you could pay $10 a month or more, I mean, how many users are on Facebook now? 1 billion, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you could pay a fee, a subscription fee, and be guaranteed privacy and not have your data manipulated and all that good stuff, would you do it?
Yeah.
Raise your hand if you would pay for. So Albert wouldn't. Hesse wouldn't.
I would.
And Tiffany, I can't see if you have your hand raised.
We're talking about a reliable way, right? We're not talking about some hack.
Yeah. Tiffany, what do you say? Is it yes or no?
Probably not.
You wouldn't pay.
Well, my question is, are you able to still access everything you thought you were accessing before? Or is it just to say that I'm no longer involved on the internet and none of my information will ever be able to be found?
Well, not the internet, just to have a private social network. So, for instance, Joe, who does not like to be on Facebook a lot for many reasons, we use Slack all the time now. It's where I'm trained. If I want to get with Joe, it's on Slack. It's not going to be on Facebook. Because Hesse and I use Facebook all the time. We're trying not to message each other for work things, because I just know she's going to be on there. So instead of sending her an email, I just jump in there and say, hey, let's do blah, blah, blah. Trying to get out of there just to tone down the noise. But I wonder all the time if people constantly complain about privacy and what they've given up, but everybody that I know is on Facebook.
So what would you be paying for? I don't understand.
Paying for not having ads in your feed, not having a manipulated feed, and having real privacy.
Well, then I can just install AdBlock for Chrome or Firefox and not have to pay the $10 either.
In Facebook?
What's that?
In Facebook?
Yeah. I can just run a Firefox or Chrome plugin called AdBlock Plus, and that'll just go ahead and get rid of all the ads, and I'll never see another ad.
But it won't get rid of the manipulation of your feed. It won't get rid of all that. It won't get rid of Facebook having access or all the apps having access to whatever you've agreed.
Well, I mean, I think I don't think you can get rid of the noise. I have 232 page-like invites right now in my notification center, and I don't know if I'm ever going to go and like all those pages. The noise is still going to be there. The amount of friends is still going to increase, and it's just like, okay, I mean, I don't really see the value in that because I feel like it doesn't change anything. I don't know what I'm going to see that's different. I mean, if $10 a month from a certain amount of people is going to encourage Facebook to work harder, I don't really believe it because Facebook engineers make 150, 160K a year. What is $10 a month per user going to encourage them to do?
Well, I'm guessing the reason there isn't a paid network like that is because it isn't feasible financially, or else somebody would do it. I don't know. Maybe. I mean...
Too late.
Yeah,
you should have encouraged Facebook to do it.
Think about it from a content perspective. It's really hard to put paid content out there because there's so much free content. It's the same type of thing. There's so many free social networks that when you try to put a price tag on something, people don't have that motivation quite as much. It's hard.
The value of content has been devalued over the past couple of years because everyone thinks that if you can start a WordPress page, you can start and blog. Then if you know how to say, 5 ways to cook a chicken, right? Then you have content marketing. And then you have BuzzFeed, you have companies like Elite Daily, and BuzzFeed, by the way, got $8 million in venture capital funding last year just because of what they do, right? That that just create a lot of clickbait. 5 reasons or 15 ways you're an introvert. It's junk like that has really, that's, I would say, eliminated or close to eliminating the intelligence that I think the internet was hopefully created for, and I would say popularized about 20 years ago. I see the type of junk that people post out there, and it kills me because it's like, okay, so I thought we were finished being obvious, 20 years ago, but apparently that's not the case anymore, because you apparently still need to tell me something equivalent to the fact that the sky is blue, and apparently 50 people will like it because that's inspirational, and I don't know if that's just me. I feel like maybe sometimes it's just me because people seem to like their, I guess, very lemming style way of walking to the cliff of the obvious statement, but I guess if people like it, who am I to say that it shouldn't be out there?
Albert, you're cracking me up, man. That's like, I told Amy this before this hangout. Like, a couple of friends, I'll find the link to this, but a couple of folks I know who are very smart VC types wrote this thing collaboratively about like what they thought, because they're a little older, what they thought the web was going to do in terms of freedom and expression of thought and creativity in the early 90s, and where we're at now, and it blew my mind. Basically, their point was, hey, the web is controlled. It's not really a free place, which is kind of what I said earlier. And I love the irony. I don't know if anybody else has caught this, but I love the irony of Facebook, kind of having a lot of these sort of quandaries at play. At the same time, Mark Zuckerberg's favorite personal endeavor is internet.org, which is about bringing access everywhere. So assumably you can monetize people in Asia, Africa, Eastern Europe, etc.
Well, we talked about that too, and that was part of the question: is what responsibility do social networks have especially outside of the U.S., to provide information, right? And I mean, is there any? Because privacy is a very different thing in, I don't know, Saudi Arabia than it is in the U.S., right? Or it is in Russia than it is, and that was part of, the question: do they have any? And I think that there are different opinions. Maybe because a lot of us are marketers, we skew towards the, well, it is what it is. We can't do anything about it.
Well, and it also depends if you are, let's say, consuming a social network in China, and you're blocked because, let's say, China says Facebook and Twitter you can't use. But if you're in the U.S. and let's say something like the Arab Spring happens, right, and you say those people have the right to get the information out to the outside world and tell them what's going on, while the government is suppressing access for them to try to get the information out.
Great, Hezzy, because that comes back to when we brought this up, and we brought the anonymous shutdown up with the Ferguson issue. DJ said Twitter has a responsibility to its brand, right? Part of what its brand is, in my mind, is this free access of information. And the Arab Spring is a perfect example of where Twitter really became the dominant source. And I did it with Ferguson as well, for news. That's where I kept going. Now, they're not a journalistic endeavor, right? They aren't held to the same standards as the Washington Post would have been, like during Watergate, right? So what is their responsibility to their brand versus to their individual users, like the person that's tweeting from Palestine? And Joe, take over because my phone's ringing. I'm going to shut it off.
Yeah, no, I mean, that actually, the really interesting sort of correlation to that, if you guys caught it, was the what was it? I don't really like to talk about this because it's a little rough, but like the beheading of the journalist a couple of weeks back, the first one, because we're now at 2 apparently.
James Foley.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. James. And Twitter deliberately made a decision to not show that. And this from a network that's sort of like everyone can do everything. It's totally free. And they referred to their policy about what to do with the requests of family members that have a deceased person who's on Twitter or whatever the case might be. And at the very bottom, it specifically said in their policy that Twitter has the right to make editorial decisions about what gets shown or not shown. That to me says a lot, right? About whether they like it or not, social networks probably do have some sort of editorial responsibility.
Of course they do, because who's holding them accountable?
Wow.
I mean, I guess the reality is, I mean, I totally get Albert's cynicism, especially where you live, about, I gave up a long time ago. That's always been my attitude in a way about privacy, and I think it's partly because I'm lazy to this degree. When we had our hangout and I learned how much work you guys do to basically mess with Facebook's algorithm, right? To avoid some of the tracking. I know it may be a futile effort, but you're still doing it to try to get around it. And I'm like, God, that's a lot of work. I'm just clicking on the Zappos ad. But I guess at the end of the day, because nobody's holding these networks accountable, including their user. Like okay, what social networks have fallen apart? MySpace. Why did it fall apart? Not because people were outraged by anything like this. We could all leave Facebook, right? We could all go to another platform, right?
Sure, yeah.
We don't, and the reason Joe got reeled back in by me and Laura is because we're in there. That's where everybody is, right? So Tiffany's saying
without Facebook, I wouldn't have met the six of you. So.
And I know there's a lot of
and that would have been tragic for sure.
No, there's a lot of positive. I get that. I was supposed to write a post for Spin Sucks, and I'm actually turning into a book. So Spin Sucks doesn't get it. About digital relationships, and a lot of it has to do with the good and the bad. But I think that what I see here is, and I'm so cynical, I see that we kind of all shrug our shoulders in a way because, okay, let's talk about user responsibility then. Let's talk about the celebrity photo hacking. And I know that that's not a social network, but to me, Google is a social network. To me, I mean, Apple is whatever. Apple's a cult to me. And I know that a lot of this was Apple-based if I have my facts straight, right? So there were raging arguments on Facebook about whose responsibility was it that famous people's nude photos were released, right? Does anybody have a really strong opinion on whose fault it was? Seriously? Joe and I do, but we have the same opinion. Somebody's good. All right, Essie, I'm going to make you talk about it. Because you love...
Yeah, well, I mean, you know what? When something like that, when it's leaked, I mean, it's a responsibility of iCloud. Was it iCloud, right? I mean, the hackers, did they do, the thing is I didn't follow it to the degree that you guys did. All I know is that it was hacked, and how long afterwards did it take for, and then I know Perez Hilton got a hold of it. He put it up on his pages, and then he took it down, realizing that he shouldn't have done it. But everybody was saying, was it Jennifer Lawrence? I don't think so. I mean, I think anything that you do is private, regardless of whether or not it's let's say provocative or solicitous.
Well, to clarify,
it's still your stuff, right?
The pictures were not put onto social networks by the user. They were in the user's phone.
Right.
So the user, whoever it is, took a picture of herself naked, and then it ended up being everywhere. Who's responsible?
Just to clarify, just so you guys are aware of how this works, because this is really important when you talk about privacy, Instagram, Facebook, and other photo apps, even if you never have a photo, they save a backup copy for a long time on your phone and on their network. It's cached.
Yes.
Just so we're all aware. Yeah.
Yeah, photo stream, right? You could see it on your phone. The minute you take a picture, there's a photo stream backs it up, right? Yeah, I don't. It's to me, it's a cut and dry case. It's not the user, right? It's never the user. I think everybody has a right to keep private what they want to keep private, regardless. Mm-hmm. Well, the fact that's right.
The argument was, well, you never should have taken a naked photo of yourself. In this day and age, you should know that if you take a naked picture, it'll end up on anywhere. That's the argument that was made over and over and over.
It's different if you emailed it to somebody, and that there's more of a chance of that. But I mean, I guess. I mean, we're paying for storage, right? And so, like, what are we going to go back down to saving anything on mainframes and not go into cloud because we're afraid of all our stuff potentially getting
I still think that we're trying to figure out the cloud. I mean, I guess maybe the thing I wonder is why people take photos like that in the first place. But it's not my place to question what other people's decisions are. I mean, if they want to take naked photos, they can take naked photos. but they should have a company that they can trust that these photos will not be taken and splattered all across the internet. I think that's maybe the one thing that's, I guess, owed to them on that side. I guess in regards to, because I mean, when it's storage, I think it's a whole lot different than, say, when you're engaging and using social media for the sake of, that type of privacy. I think in some sense you're talking about two different types of privacy. One is a privacy that I think has kind of been owed and understand to at the beginning of time. The other one is just kind of like, okay, well, you can choose to be here or not. Or I mean, maybe you could even go and store it somewhere else. Take the naked photo, put it on your phone, then download it to your laptop, and then put it on a hard drive that will never go online.
Yeah, but
like I think
okay.
there's definitely a difference here of someone posting it on their own personal feed
Mm-hmm.
publicly and people to have stored it in a safe place where they didn't think it was going to get shared because it was stored in their own personal accounts, and have that
Yeah.
hacked and stolen. Like, that's stolen essentially.
Right.
So
I
they've done
agree.
everything they can to like protect themselves.
So it's like, Albert, maybe you would never take a naked photo of yourself, but there has to be something in your life that's completely private that you wouldn't want to be shared on the social network. I see it as a lot the same thing, that, you have those things that are private, and if you fully believe that you're
Maybe
keeping
there are
them
a
in
few
a private
emails,
place.
but I can't really think of anything beyond that.
So there's
Well,
I guess
nothing in
maybe.
your life.
Think
Like
about this.
your
Say you had a
personal-
kid. I know you're not a father, but if you had a child
Yes,
and
that's
you
true. I agree.
right?
Yeah.
And you store the pictures, and especially I think about people who are famous, where it's even more of an issue, right? You had a picture of a
Mhm.
child, and it gets hacked, which has happened many times. To famous people, what then? What then? Because you have every right to have a picture of your child that you don't want plastered all over social networks. And is it a crime? The people that are viewing it, like, okay, so I kept seeing these posts that said, don't click on the Jennifer Lawrence thing, and this is why, right? The
Mhm.
people that are clicking on it, are they committing some sort of violation as well? No one, everyone's too busy in the
No,
chat.
not at all.
It's totally.
Well, I'm thinking. Sorry, I'm
Polaroid.
following that. And I'm thinking back on the. It was kind of silly, but there were some pictures, like with Miley Cyrus a couple years ago, that everyone thought was child porn or on the borderline, and then with Willow Smith, and it was on the borderline, and people were angry at the parents, people were angry at the other people posting these photos. And it just kind of, to me, it comes back to the individuals, is why are you so invested in this? Why is it important for you to see Jennifer Lawrence naked and then comment about it? And yes,
Because
we
some
still need to
people
talk
want
about.
to do their thing. I mean, I don't mean to make this cool hangouts after dark, but
But we also
It's
have to
just
look
interesting
at
that the conversation is so.
But isn't that responsibility of the user? So I intentionally have not looked at any of those naked pictures, right? Not that I
Right.
really wanted to. I mean, if it was, I don't know.
But again,
tried.
it's the internet. It's the internet. You're gonna, even if these photos weren't put out there, somebody's gonna go and Photoshop it and do their creepy thing and put it on Imager, put it on Reddit.
Okay,
if you had
I
a
get it.
stolen car,
But
you wouldn't ride in it.
yeah, exactly.
If you have
So,
a stolen
it's
car,
stolen
you can
property.
ride in it.
Like, if my friend came into it, like tried to pick me up, and I found out their car was stolen, I'd be like, hell no, I'm not in this car. Like, get me out right now. I'm not aiding in this crime. And this is a property crime.
So clicking, I mean, that's the thing about the user's responsibility too. If you know that those photos were taken illegally, why is it not a crime to look at them? Or why is it at least?
I mean,
why
I
don't
think
you at
it's
least
I
feel
think
like,
it's a crime if you're looking at them in the wrong way. I mean, at the end of the day, I mean, I guess
what does that mean?
straight here,
Wait a
it's
second.
like
What does that mean?
Clarify that.
I'm just leaving that one
we're human
alone,
beings.
Albert.
We all. Maybe this is my first and my last time on this hangout here, but we're humans. We all know what everybody has when it comes to body parts, whether you're male or female.
Rosie,
guess-
what's the right way?
This is something very private, something really private.
Doesn't viewer? Is that you're saying? I don't know.
No, I mean I'm not. There is that element of this is somebody else's body. You shouldn't be like looking at it like you want to have it for dinner. But it's okay. Maybe I'm not making a very good point right here, right now.
Okay. All right. Okay. It wasn't a good point though. At least it was funny. There are things. I'm sorry. There are some things that went by in the chat that I wanted to get out. Like Samantha said that it's victim blaming. When I've heard many women say they shouldn't have they shouldn't have taken the naked pictures. They should know better. And I do agree that that's victim blaming. I mean, I guess to me, I still haven't. A lot of times when we have these hangouts, I feel like I get to a better idea of what I think about something. And I get the cynicism. I totally understand it. It's an intelligent and rational reaction to the world we're living in, because I don't think saying get off social media is really an answer. It holds you back in many, many ways. It holds you back professionally. I mean, look at all of us. And we may be friends, but we're also connected for professional reasons. And so I guess I'm not at the point where I understand it sounds like we're saying that this overall voice is that the social networks really don't have any responsibility. They have editorial control. They have no responsibility because it's free. And I'd
like to point something out too, which is that this is a really nice sort of utopian world we live in a mental construct about how we choose what gets put on. Hey, look, I hate to tell all of you, but drones are here, right? And if you don't take that picture and post it on a social network, there's zero reason why in about 10 or 15 years it's not going to get on there anyways. So to me, that's the reason for the. I'm not saying having ethics or asking social networks to have responsibility and to be, editorial about it and to explain their decisions clear, particularly that. I'm not saying that's easy. I'm not saying that's easily scalable. I think it still has to happen though.
Yeah, I have a view here about, it seems here like there's going to be a foregone conclusion that there will be there's an expectation that there's not going to be any regulation against social networks, and that at some point the government they're going to let them self-regulate. Because if the government decides that, there are certain things that social networks can do and can't do, and they have to set the precedence at a higher level, then what's the point of having a social network? Suddenly it becomes more of I couldn't say, like a communist regime, right? A social network, it defeats the whole purpose of the entity in itself.
And I think it's already kind of been proven that the internet is a wild place, in the sense that when the internet is not just the United States but worldwide, and you all of a sudden have to deal with different jurisdictions and different countries and different laws and different ethical values and different cultures. I mean, how do you tell somebody in, say, I don't know, South Africa that their view on these types of photos should be different? Or maybe, say, a country where, people don't wear that much clothes. And it's like, okay, well, a naked Jennifer Lawrence is what we kind of see here every day.
Denmark, where they love being.
Or even Europe, so like, I mean, this is another extension of the point that the United States tends to be a very prude place. In Eastern Europe, you have newspapers that on like the 6th page or something have a nude person regardless of what day of the week it is. And so where do we draw the line between, I guess, those types of things too?
Yeah, and that was part of that discussion too about information. I mean, in Denmark, by about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, there's all sorts of naked TV shows, right? Nobody cares. Mm-hmm. Kids love to be nude. It's, part of the deal. I guess that's part of it. I think more about privacy when it comes to personal information. Like the story Joe told, and when my buddy was threatened by this man who ended up getting his address and sending him pictures of his home and threatening his wife and threatening to do horrible things to his wife. It was totally out of control. Facebook was like, sorry. All they did was shut down the Facebook profile, the fake profile where he duplicated my friend. The only reason my friend caught him is because he's a maniac, but he went to the local police and someone in there took mercy on him, and I don't know how, got the information and tracked him down, and he was prosecuted. But those cases are rare. You know how often the other happens, and there is nowhere to turn to. It's that whole thing you talked about, Albert, is there's no customer service. There's no one to call. There's nowhere to go, and I don't know that I'm okay with that. I mean, of course, I'm not leaving Facebook. I have an addiction. I can't. But I don't know. I don't feel good about this conclusion we seem to be coming to, which is it's free, and we just have to deal with it. And I really agree with Kieran, and I could kill him for not being here with the voice, that it isn't free. We give up a lot to participate. And yes, we get a lot, but we give up a lot. And I think that networks have... Go ahead.
Sorry, I don't mean to interrupt, but I have a question for you. In that scenario with your friend, what would you have liked Facebook to have done? What would be the preferred, outside of shutting down the account?
Turn that user, because they knew who it was, turn their information over to the police. That's what I would like them to have done.
Was it requested by the police?
Yes, and it took a month and a half to get that information. And the only reason that they got...
Sorry, go on.
Oh, no, go ahead.
I was just wondering, could Facebook have ever decided that maybe it didn't want to monetize and get brand pages and do all this stuff, and instead just stay as a standalone social app that didn't take away your privacy or anything like that? I guess you can play the what if game. It's 2005 again.
Not for $100 billion.
Yeah, not money. And I understand that there's money to be made, and I understand that there's a trade-off. Yeah. I just don't believe that the user should always be totally powerless, and we are. Right? That's what we're saying.
Well, you know, something that's interesting to think about, too, is think about identity theft issues that happen, and really similar, and these could be totally uninvolved in the social networks, but they happen with credit cards and social security numbers and whatnot. Similar things happen as to what happened to your friend and what happens to people when they have things like this happen to them on the social networks. So this is a problem that is offline as well. And so I think that's something that's important for us to look at, too, is it's not just a social issue. It's everywhere. And I've heard similar stories about people, like how banks and other entities not turning over information to the police, because here again, who do you protect? Like, it could have, the situation could be flipped, and, you know, the good guy could actually be the bad guy. And that's where it's a slippery slope.
Isn't that the job of the law enforcement and our justice system to figure out, not the job of the social network? See, that's where I get back to, because it's so inconsistent. Someone said earlier in the chat, the people who are protected are the ones who can apply pressure, right, to the social networks more than others, and the little guy isn't. So it isn't a fair playing field. But I don't know. I don't feel like I have any answer. Like, this is what it is, right? We're all going to be cynical. I don't know, Joe. Maybe you feel different.
I don't agree. I mean, I don't think it's easy. I don't think it's pleasant. But you know, this look, you know, and this goes back to kind of what Albert and I were sort of like pointing at, which is the web is not this free utopia. I'm sorry, it just isn't, right? Somebody owns the web, and anybody who's researched ICANN and understands how IP addresses are assigned and some of the, you know, not as fun sort of geeky stuff. You know, that stuff has always been limited by the way that they set up the structure for it, and people own that, right? People own blocks of things. People own the broadband access. The FCC chairman today just said that the majority of Americans don't have access to adequate internet, basically. I mean, that's sort of basically it. Like, there's always a trade-off. There's always things at play. And ultimately, somebody has to decide how that's regulated. Should that always be the government imposing and enforcing? Should it be a mix of, you know, the private industry, like creating technologies that encourage that fairness, that openness, that self-control for people? I mean, I don't know what the answers are, but it sure has to happen. There has to be some kind of combination of regulation, I think.
I mean, I guess
here's something to think about when it comes to, think about how, I mean, we debate these issues from the beginning of having like a social society. So think about, you know, when our country's been, or our world has been debated, freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom of everything. We're in this new time period that we're working through these issues. There's not, like, we don't have the answers, just like our founding fathers didn't have the answers, or any political theorists didn't have the answers back then. It's like working through and finding those weird gray lines, and that's the difficult part. But having the discussion is what's positive about it.
No, and I get that. That makes me feel better. And I also think that what really comes out of this is that the user has to be hyper responsible. Even though they can protect themselves totally, I think that a lot of people don't get what people sitting in this think tank get, and a lot of it has to do with where we work and the space we're in, you know? The fact that we're just thinking at all means that we're more technically savvy, or technologically savvy. So I guess that those are the two big takeaways. So, okay, Laura, you get a gold star for giving me this much hope back. But now I got to move on because we're going to finish up here, and I got to introduce what's going on next week. Because next week, this time, I will not be in the proper state to be on the Hangout. Because I'm going back to Hershey to my homecoming at Milton Hershey, and Joe and Samantha are going to co-host. So Samantha's got to be bitchier than normal. Somebody's got to impersonate.
Out of character.
Somebody's got to impersonate me. And the topic next week is actually one I'm really interested in, is socialpreneurship and socially responsible companies and millennials' perspective and take on those. Yeah. And Joe, I'm failing at this. The week after that is when we're going to do a travel segment, you know, millennials and travel, which is going to be a fun, lighthearted one compared to this.
And we should schedule one on marriage and relationships, like we were talking about.
That might jump. So maybe we'll put that ahead of the travel one. I'm not sure. Anyway, thanks everybody who watches, and you guys know my blog post will be coming out on Sunday, and so
cool.
I will try to quote you all properly. And hang on if you want to stay in the Hangout. I'm going to stop the live broadcast. Bye.